The story of Phil Spector is one of great success, mixed with deep darkness. In the 1960s, he was known as one of the most important people in music. He created a famous technique called the wall of sound, which changed how songs were recorded and heard. Many of his songs became huge hits, and his name was respected across the music world. But behind that success, there was another side of him that very few people understood at the time. People who worked closely with him later shared stories that were shocking and frightening. Some women said he pointed guns at them. His own wife once ran away from their home without shoes because he had taken them from her. There were strange stories about his house, including a gold coffin in the basement. These details painted a picture of a man who was not just difficult, but deeply troubled. In 2003, everything came to a breaking point when an actress named Lana Clarkson entered his home and never came out alive. That night shocked the world, but for many people who knew his past, it was not completely surprising. His behavior had been building for decades. To understand what really happened, we need to go back many years, to his childhood, and see how his life slowly turned into something much darker than anyone expected. Phil Spector was born on December 26, 1939, in the Bronx, New York. His early life was not easy. His parents were children of immigrants who had come to America hoping for a better life. Like many families at that time, they struggled with money. His father, Benjamin, worked hard but could not keep up with financial pressure. Debt became a serious problem, and the stress affected the entire family. When Phil was just 9 years old, his father took his own life. This moment changed everything. Losing a parent in such a tragic way left a deep emotional wound. On his father's grave were the words, "To know him is to love him." These words would later become very important in Phil's life. After his father's death, his mother had to raise the family alone. Life became even more difficult, and the feeling of loss stayed with Phil as he grew up. Many people believe this early trauma played a big role in shaping his personality. He became quiet, sensitive, and sometimes withdrawn. He also developed a strong need for control, possibly because his life had once felt so out of control. These early experiences did not just stay in his past, they followed him into his future and influenced many of his actions as an adult. In 1953, Phil and his family moved to Los Angeles. The move was meant to give them a fresh start, but it was not easy for him. He felt like an outsider in his new environment. He was small in size, shy, and often kept to himself. While other teenagers found it easy to fit in, Phil struggled. However, Los Angeles was also becoming the center of a growing music scene. This environment slowly gave him a sense of direction. He found comfort in music, and it became a way for him to express feelings he could not easily share with others. He began learning different instruments, including guitar, piano, drums, and even French horn. He spent a lot of time in recording studios, watching and learning how music was made. One studio in particular, Gold Star Studios, became very important to him. There, he observed experienced engineers and producers, picking up skills that would later define his career. Even though he briefly thought about becoming a court stenographer after finishing school, it quickly became clear that music was his true passion. By the time he was a teenager, he was already showing signs of talent and ambition that would soon bring him success. That success came quickly. In 1958, at just 18 years old, Phil wrote a song inspired by the words on his father's grave. To know him is to love him. He formed a group called the Teddy Bears with his classmates and recorded the song. At first, it did not gain much attention, but slowly it became popular. Soon, it reached #1 on the Billboard charts. This was a huge achievement, especially for someone so young. The success gave Phil confidence and opened doors in the music industry. He was not just a singer or a musician, he wanted to control every part of the music-making process. He worked as a songwriter, producer, and arranger, something very rare at the time. However, his strong desire for control also created problems. Even in these early years, people began to notice his difficult personality. He demanded perfection and often pushed others too hard. Members of the Teddy Bears eventually left the group because they could not handle his behavior. Instead of learning from this, Phil continued down the same path, becoming more controlling as his success grew. His talent was undeniable, but so was the growing tension between him and the people around him. As the 1960s began, Phil Spector became one of the most powerful figures in music. He worked with many artists and created hit songs that defined the era. He developed the wall of sound, a recording technique that used many instruments playing together to create a rich and full sound. This style made his songs stand out and gave them a unique energy. He worked with groups like the Ronettes and the Crystals, producing songs that became classics. However, behind the scenes, his behavior was becoming more troubling. He often treated artists as if they were tools rather than people. He controlled their image, their voices, and even their earnings. In some cases, singers were not properly credited for their work. For example, he sometimes used one singer's voice but released the song under another group's name. This caused confusion and anger among the artists. Many felt cheated and disrespected. His need for control extended beyond music. It began to affect his personal relationships as well. Stories of his strange and sometimes frightening behavior started to spread, but at the time, his success protected him from serious consequences. As the years passed, Phil's behavior became even more extreme. He was known to carry guns and would sometimes use them to threaten people. Several women later said they were terrified of him. His marriage to Ronnie Spector was especially disturbing. She later shared that he controlled her life completely, even locking her inside their home. At one point, she escaped barefoot because she was so desperate to get away. These stories showed a man who was deeply troubled and dangerous. Despite this, he continued to work in music and remained respected for his past achievements. This created a strange situation where his talent was praised, but his behavior was ignored or hidden. Over time, however, it became harder to ignore. His actions were becoming more unpredictable, and the fear around him was growing. People began to see that the man behind the music was not the same as the image he presented to the public. Everything came to a tragic end in 2003 when actress Lana Clarkson died at Phil Spector's home. She had gone there after meeting him earlier that night. Hours later, she was found dead from a gunshot wound. Phil claimed it was an accident, but evidence suggested otherwise. The case went to trial and attracted worldwide attention. Many of the stories about his past behavior were brought into the courtroom. Witnesses spoke about his history of violence and control. In the end, he was found guilty of murder. This moment changed how the world saw him. He was no longer just a music legend. He was a criminal. The trial revealed details that confirmed what many had feared for years. The darkness that had been hidden behind his success was now fully exposed. His story became a warning about how power and talent can sometimes hide dangerous behavior. The life of Phil Spector is a powerful example of how success does not always mean happiness or stability. He achieved incredible things in music and changed the industry forever. But at the same time, he struggled with deep personal issues that he never truly overcame. His story shows how early trauma, combined with power and control, can lead to destructive behavior. It also reminds us that talent does not excuse harmful actions. Today, people remember both sides of his life, the genius and the darkness. His music still exists and continues to influence artists, but his legacy is forever marked by the pain he caused. In the end, his story is not just about fame or crime. It is about understanding how a person can rise to great heights while also falling into deep darkness. Even after his early successes in the 1960s, Phil Spector's obsession with control never faded. As he moved deeper into the music industry, he became known as both a brilliant producer and a fearsome personality. He would spend hours, sometimes all night, perfecting every detail of a recording session. Musicians who worked with him often described sessions as exhausting, but the results were groundbreaking. Spector wanted the music to sound larger than life, and he treated the studio like an instrument itself. He layered multiple instruments, created echo effects, and experimented with orchestral arrangements. This approach produced songs that were incredibly rich and full of energy, which helped him build a reputation as a genius in the industry. Groups like the Ronettes, the Crystals, and Darlene Love became the faces of his success, but behind the scenes, they were under his strict control. Phil made decisions about who would sing which lines, who would receive credit for songs, and even how performers would appear in public. His power over these artists was nearly absolute. Many of them later admitted feeling trapped or manipulated, but at the time, there was little they could do because Phil's influence was unmatched. His music reached millions, but the people creating it often felt invisible or powerless. At the same time, Spector's personal life was increasingly unstable. His relationships with women were often controlling and sometimes frightening. Accounts from friends, colleagues, and family show that he could be obsessive and possessive. One of the most famous examples is his marriage to Ronnie Spector, the lead singer of the Ronettes. She later described how Phil controlled her career, her finances, and even her movements. He would isolate her from friends and family, creating an environment where she felt trapped. In some accounts, he even physically intimidated or threatened her, showing that his need for dominance extended far beyond the studio. These stories reveal a man whose genius in music was inseparable from his dangerous behavior. His personality, shaped by early childhood trauma, combined with power and fame to create a volatile mix. While the world celebrated his musical accomplishments, very few people understood the fear and control that surrounded his life behind closed doors. This duality, brilliance and menace, became a defining part of his legacy. By the late 1960s and 1970s, Phil's reputation in the music industry was that of a visionary but also a tyrant. His wall of sound had influenced countless artists and changed the way music was produced. Hits like Be My Baby by the Ronettes and Did You Ron Ron by the Crystals showcased his innovative techniques and cemented his influence on pop music. Yet at the same time, reports of erratic behavior, manipulative contracts, and harsh treatment of performers painted a troubling picture. Artists sometimes worked with him because of his fame, but others avoided him out of fear. Those who did collaborate often left with stories of long, exhausting sessions where every detail was scrutinized and every note controlled. Despite these challenges, his ambition never slowed. Phil constantly sought new ways to experiment with sound, pushing the boundaries of what a recording studio could accomplish. But as his fame and fortune grew, so did his isolation and eccentric behavior. He became less connected to reality outside of music, increasingly obsessed with power, control, and his own vision. The darkness in Phil Spector's life reached its most tragic chapter in the early 2000s with the death of Lana Clarkson. She was an actress who met him at his mansion in California, and her death shocked the world. Clarkson's murder forced law enforcement and the public to finally confront the dangerous side of a man long celebrated for his genius. During the trial, many stories of his past behavior were brought forward. Witnesses described violent tendencies, threats, and manipulative patterns that stretched back decades. The courtroom exposed the full scope of his troubling personality, showing that his music and his darker impulses were deeply intertwined. Phil was eventually found guilty of murder and sentenced to prison. For many, the trial confirmed what they had long suspected. The man behind the music had a dangerous and destructive side that could no longer be ignored. The contrast between his talent and his crimes became a central part of his story, forcing the public to wrestle with the question of whether genius can ever excuse harmful behavior. Phil Spector's story is a reminder that fame, talent, and creativity do not automatically equate to goodness or morality. He changed the music industry forever, influencing artists across generations and creating timeless songs. But his life also shows how unresolved trauma, combined with immense power, can lead to destructive choices. His legacy is complex, one part groundbreaking artistry, one part darkness and danger. People still listen to his music, inspired by his innovative sound, but his history serves as a cautionary tale. It demonstrates the human cost of obsession, control, and unchecked ambition. Even decades after his most famous works, the world continues to debate how to reconcile his contributions to music with the serious harm he caused in the lives of others. Phil Spector's story remains both fascinating and troubling, a reminder that even the brightest stars can cast long shadows. After his conviction, Phil Spector spent the remaining years of his life in prison, far removed from the world he had once dominated. The man who had once controlled artists, charts, and recording studios was now confined to a small cell, stripped of the power he had craved for decades. In prison, he had little contact with the outside world, and the music industry that had celebrated him for his genius continued without him. While some of his peers and fans still admired his contributions to music, most people recognized that his personal actions could never be separated from his professional achievements. His life became a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition, obsessive control, and the way early trauma can shape a person's behavior in destructive ways. Despite being behind bars, Phil Spector continued to command attention. Documentaries, books, and media stories dissected his life and career, examining both the brilliance of his music and the darkness of his personal life. Scholars, journalists, and music lovers debated how to reconcile his groundbreaking innovations with the harm he caused to others. Was it possible to appreciate his work while condemning his actions? Many concluded that both truths could coexist. His music changed the world, but his personal life left a trail of fear, pain, and tragedy. Even in prison, Spector's story remained a lesson about the human mind, the costs of power, and the consequences of unresolved trauma. Psychologists who studied him often pointed to the early losses he experienced, particularly the death of his father, as shaping his need for control and his emotional volatility. His mother's struggles and the family's financial hardships added layers of insecurity and anxiety, which influenced how he interacted with others. This background did not excuse his actions, but it helped explain some of the patterns that emerged in his adult life. Spector's genius in music and his destructive tendencies were intertwined, each feeding the other in ways that made him both fascinating and frightening. Music allowed him to channel some of his pain into creativity, yet the same need for perfection and dominance caused fear and suffering among those around him. His life demonstrates how talent and tragedy can exist side by side, and how personal history can shape a person's choices in profound ways. For many, his story also serves as a warning. Unchecked power, combined with unresolved emotional pain, can have consequences that extend far beyond the individual. Phil Spector's influence on music continues to be felt today, despite the controversies surrounding his life. Artists across generations have cited him as an inspiration, particularly for his innovative recording techniques and his creation of the wall of sound. His methods changed how songs were arranged, produced, and perceived, leaving a permanent mark on the industry. From pop and rock to modern R&B, echoes of his style can still be heard in contemporary music. Yet, while his creative legacy is undeniable, it is inseparable from the darker aspects of his personality. Students of music history often study his work alongside accounts of his controlling behavior, emphasizing the dual nature of his life, brilliance paired with danger. His story challenges audiences to consider the complex relationship between genius and morality. Can one admire an artist's work while condemning the artist's actions? In Spector's case, the answer is complicated but necessary. Understanding the full picture of his life offers lessons not only about music but also about human behavior, power, and the consequences of choices made over a lifetime. Ultimately, the life of Phil Spector is both inspiring and tragic. On one hand, he revolutionized music, created timeless songs, and left a lasting impact on the industry. On the other, his personal actions caused pain, fear, and eventually death. His story illustrates how early life experiences, unchecked ambition, and a need for control can combine to create a complex, often dangerous personality. It reminds us that fame and talent do not shield anyone from the consequences of their behavior. Phil Spector will always be remembered for his contributions to music, but he will also be remembered for the darkness behind the genius. His life is a powerful narrative about creativity, control, and consequence, offering lessons for musicians, historians, and audiences alike. The world continues to listen to his music, but now with the understanding that the story behind the songs is as important as the songs themselves. Phil Spector's legacy is a reminder that brilliance can coexist with darkness, and that the full truth of a person's life often contains both beauty and tragedy. Phil Spector was born on December 26, 1939, in the Bronx, New York. His early life was shaped by hardship, loss, and the weight of responsibility. His parents were the children of Russian Jewish immigrants who had crossed oceans to find a better life. They brought with them hope, ambition, and a strong work ethic, but also the heavy burden of poverty. Phil's father, Benjamin, worked as an ironworker, trying to support the family while debts steadily mounted. The family lived in a small working-class neighborhood where every dollar counted and financial stress was a constant presence. Young Phil absorbed the tension and instability in the household from an early age, sensing the anxiety and fear that haunted his parents. This constant pressure shaped the way he viewed the world and influenced his later actions, both in music and in his personal life. The most profound tragedy of his childhood occurred when Phil was just 9 years old. His father, overwhelmed by debt and unable to find a way out, took his own life in April 1949. The impact of this loss was immediate and shattering. Everything in the home collapsed in that instant, leaving Phil and his younger siblings in the care of their mother, Bertha, who suddenly had to raise 2 children alone. The gravestone of Benjamin Spector bore the inscription, "To know him is to love him." These words, meant to honor his memory, would echo through Phil's life, influencing both the art he created and the complex, often dark aspects of his personality. The grief he carried from that moment never fully healed, and the absence of his father left a void that shaped his need for control and his emotional responses in ways that would be evident throughout his life. In 1953, the family moved to Los Angeles in search of a fresh start, hoping the distance from their past struggles might ease the pain of their loss. At 13, Phil was already fragile from the weight of his